Hey guys, welcome back to week 2 on our distance learning adventure. Happy Easter. I'm recording this on Sunday. I hope you guys had a good Easter. Had a lot of fun with that. You can share on check-in how your Easter went tomorrow at 2. Remember this week we're trying to use that Bookshare program to follow along as I read. Or I saw Clarity in the comments also said she had her own copy of the book. So if you go on Amazon, she said she got it for $3. Order a copy. It should be here in 2 days, and then you can follow along in the book. I actually like having books in my hand a lot more than I like uh, books online. I don't really care for reading books online, but it's better than nothing. So if you do not have a book, go to the Bookshare, pause this video now, go to the Bookshare website. I put the link in our Google Classroom thread. Click on the link, use your Moby Max login information to log in, find My Side of the Mountain, click on it. We are on page 20. So for those of you following along, go to page 20 and follow along as I read the words, just like how we were used to doing in class. I made a slideshow too. Remember, as we read, we want to get a movie playing in our head, but sometimes that might be hard if we don't know what the book's talking about. So I made a Google slideshow with some images just to help us get those movies playing in our head as we go. So anything I was like, well, they probably don't know what this looks like, I made a slide for. So I'm going to actually switch to the slideshow now. I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Okay, so now you should be seeing a picture. This is the Catskill Mountains, and it's a hand-drawn map. And as we read, you'll see why I picked this image. But this is just so you can kind of visualize what this looks like, what kind of stuff is around. And this is kind of modern day, so it's not when the book took place, but just to help you imagine what a hand-drawn map of the area would look like. So page 20, the manner in which I find Gribley's farm. And remember, Gribley's farm is his grandfather's farm located in these Catskill Mountains. That boy, Sam, has ran away to go live in these mountains by himself. The next day, I told Bill goodbye. And remember, Bill was the old man that taught him how to build the fire. And as I strode, warm and fed, onto the road, he called to me, "I'll see you tonight. The back door will be open if you want a roof over your head." I said okay, but I knew I wouldn't see Bill again. I knew how to make fire, and that was my weapon. With fire, I could conquer the Catskills. I also knew how to fish. To fish and to make a fire. That was all I needed to know, I thought. Imagine living in the woods. Building a fire and being able to fish are important skills, but I can think of a lot of other things that I would like to know in order to survive. 3 rides that morning took me to Delhi. Somewhere around here was great-grandfather's beech tree, and the name Gribley carved on it. This much I knew from Dad's stories. By 6 o'clock, I still not had found anyone who even heard of Gribley's, much less Gribley's beech. And remember, a beech is a tree, a beech tree. His grandfather had carved his name on the beech tree, marking out where their property boundaries were. And so I slept on the porch of a schoolhouse and ate chocolate bars for supper. It was cold and hard, but I was so tired I could have slept in a wind tunnel. And remember, too, that first night he had a hard time sleeping because he was so cold, but now he's getting used to it and he's able to sleep even though it's really cold. At dawn, I thought really hard. Where would I find out about the Gribley's farm? Some old map, I said. Where would I find an old map? Where do you guys think you'd find an old map? Now we'd look on the internet, right? The library. Maybe I'd try it and see. The library is a good place to go if you need information on something. The librarian was very helpful. She was sort of young and had brown hair and brown eyes and loved books as much as I did. The library didn't open until 10:30. I got there at 9. After I had lolled and rolled and sat on the steps for 15 or 20 minutes, the door whisked open, and this tall lady asked me to come on in and browse around until opening time. All I said to her was that I wanted to find the old Gribley farm and that the Gribleys haven't lived on it for maybe 100 years, and she was off. I can still hear her heels click when I think of her, scattering herself around those shelves, finding me old maps, histories of the Catskills, and files of letters and deeds that must have come from attics around Delhi. Miss Turner, that was her name, found it. She found Gribley's farm in an old book of Delaware County. Then she worked out the roads to it and drew me maps and everything. Wow, that's nice to have a librarian draw you a map. That's pretty cool. And that's why I picked this map to share first. Imagine her drawing a hand-drawn map, similar to this. It probably wouldn't be quite as good, but she drew the map by hand, so you can see these little roads and trails on here. And this is very similar to the map the librarian drew for Sam. Finally, she said, "What do you want to know for? Some school project?" "Oh no, Miss Turner. I want to go live there." "But Sam, it is all forest and trees now. The house is probably only a foundation covered with moss." Remember, it's been 100 years. So if you leave a house in the woods for 100 years, there's not going to be much left of it to go back to. "That's just what I want. I'm going to trap animals and eat nuts and bulbs and berries and make myself a house. You see, I am Sam Gribley, and I thought I would like to live on my great-grandfather's farm." Miss Turner was the only person that believed me. She smiled, sat back in her chair, and said, "Well, I declare." The library was just opening when I gathered the notes we had made and started off. As I pushed open the door, Miss Turner leaned over and said to me, "Sam, we have some very good books on plants, trees, and animals in case you get stuck." That's nice of her to offer those books. I'd probably take those books because those books could help that boy survive in the woods with information about different plants that were edible and different ways to catch animals. There's a lot of good survival books at the library. I knew what she was thinking, so I told her I would remember that. With Miss Turner's map, I found the first stone wall that marked the farm. The old roads to it were all grown up and mostly gone, but by locating the stream at the bottom of the mountain, I was able to begin at the bridge and go north and up a mile and a half. There, caterpillaring around boulders, roller coastering up ravines and down hills, was a mound of rocks that had once been great grandfather's boundary fence. So those words, caterpillaring around boulders. So I have to think about how caterpillars move. They kind of like move like this. And then roller coastering up ravines and down hills. You have to think of a roller coaster like going up and down. And that marks an old fence. So it's just a line of stones going up and down on these hills. And I can imagine that in my head because of those roller coastering and caterpillaring things. I have to think about what those things look like and then think about how they would describe this old fence. And then, do you know, I couldn't believe I was there. I sat on the old gray stones a long time looking through the forest, up that steep mountain, and saying to myself, "It must be Sunday afternoon and it's raining. And Dad is trying to keep us all quiet by telling us about great grandfather's farm. And he's telling it so real that I can see it." So when you tell a good story, you want people to feel like it's real. And then I said, "No, I'm here because I was never this hungry before." I wanted to run all the way back to the library and tell Miss Turner that I had found it, partly because she would have liked to have known, partly because Dad had said to me as I left, "If you find the place, tell someone at Delhi. I may visit you someday." Of course, he was kidding because he thought I'd be home the next day, but after many weeks, maybe he would think I meant what I said, and you might come to see me. And I included this map. So this is New York City. This is the whole state of New York. But this is New York City, and this is that town Delhi that he went to the library at. So his dad might come down from New York and go to Delhi. I want to say this green spot is the Catskill Mountains, but I'm not 100% sure. I'm not that familiar. But New York to Delhi, you see here, it's 117 miles. It takes 2 hours and 19 minutes. Remember, the boy hitchhiked all the way from New York City down to Delhi. Okay. However, I was too hungry to run back. I took my hook and line and went back down the mountain to the stream. I caught a big old catfish, climbed back to the stone wall in great spirits. It was getting late, so I didn't try to explore. I went right to work making a fire. I decided that even if I didn't have enough time to cut boughs for a bed, remember he's making the bed out of those branches, I was going to have cooked fish and a fire to huddle around during those cold nights. May is not exactly warm in the Catskills. By firelight that night, I wrote this. Dear Bill, that was the old man. Remember the old man that taught him how to make a fire? After 3 nights, I finally got a handful of dry grass on the glow in the tinder. Grass is even better than pine needles. And tomorrow, I'm going to try the outside bark of the river birch. I read somewhere that it has combustible oil in it that the Indians used to start fires. Anyways, I did just what you showed me and had cooked catfish for dinner. It was good. Your friend, Sam. And so if you remember that first night he caught trout, catfish is a lot different. So catfish look like this. They have long whiskers on their face that they use for feeling. So catfish and trout are way different. They taste different. I don't like catfish as much as I like trout, but this is what a catfish looks like. So when you imagine that, a fish isn't a fish. There's different types of fish. This is a catfish. He was eating trout before. After I wrote that, I remember I didn't know his last name. So I stuffed the note in my pocket, made myself a bed of boughs and leaves in the shelter of the stone wall, and fell right to sleep. I must say this now about that first fire. It was magic. Out of dead tinder and grass and sticks came a live, warm light. It cracked and snapped and smoked and filled the woods with brightness. It lighted the trees and made them warm and friendly. I stood tall and bright and held back the night. Oh, this was a different night than the first dark, frightful one. Also, I was stuffed on catfish. I've since learned to cook it more, but never have I enjoyed a meal as much as that one, and never had I felt so independent again. Remember, he thinks as long as he can do the fire and catch fish, he'll be all right. So now we're on page 25, and it's a new chapter, and it's called "In Which I Find Many Useful Plants." So that's the heading, and so in my head, I'm like, oh, this might be a section where he talks about the types of plants that is going to help him survive. The following morning, I stood up, stretched, and looked about me. Birds were dripping from the trees, little birds singing and flying and pouring over the limbs. And so I think about that. That's kind of weird, dripping from the trees. So I just think about a tree just filled with all these birds. So many birds, they're like falling out of this tree, fighting and being loud. This must be the warbler migration. I said, and I laughed because there are so many birds. I've never seen so many. My big voice rolled through the woods. Their little voices seemed to rise and answer. And I looked up what a warbler is. It's this little yellow bird. And so every year they migrate south for the winter. And so a warbler, they're known for these yellow coloring. And we kind of have a bird like that around here called a goldfinch, but on the East Coast, they're called warblers. They're a little bit bigger than our goldfinch. They were eating 3 or 4 in a maple tree near me were darting along the limbs, pecking and snatching at something delicious on the trees. I wonder if there was anything there for a hungry boy. I pulled a limb down and all I saw were leaves, twigs, and flowers. I ate a flower. It's not very good. One manual I had read said to watch what the birds and animals were eating in order to learn what is edible and non-edible in the forest. And edible means you can eat it. If the animal life can eat it, it is safe for humans. The book did suggest that a raccoon had taste more nearly like ours. Certainly, the birds were no example. Then I wondered if they were not eating something I could see. Tiny insects, perhaps? Well, anyways, whatever it was, I decided to fish. I took out my line and hook and walked down the stream. I lay on the log and dangled my line in the bright water. The fish were not biting. That made me hungrier. My stomach pinched. It really does hurt to be terribly hungry. A stream is supposed to be full of food. It is the easiest place to get a lot of food in a hurry. I needed something in a hurry, but what? I looked through the clear water and saw the tracks of mussels in the mud. I ran along the log back to shore, took up my clothes, and plunged into the icy water. I collected almost a peck of mussels in very little time at all and began tying them in my sweater to carry them back to class or back to camp. And so a peck of mussels is like a bucket of mussels. And it's not mussels like we think around here where they're like black and long. These are freshwater mussels. So mussels, freshwater mussels look more like clams, okay? They're not like the black ones that we see in the ocean. But I don't have to carry them anywhere, I said to myself. I have my fire in my pocket. I don't need a table. I can sit right here by the stream and eat. So I did. I wrapped the mussels in leaves and sort of steamed them in coals. They're not quite as good as clams, a little stronger, I would say. But by the time I had eaten three, I had forgotten what clams tasted like and knew only how delicious freshwater mussels were. I actually got full. I wandered back to great-grandfather's farm and began to explore. Most of the acreage was maple and beech, some pine, dogwoods, ash, and here and there a glorious hickory. I made a sketch of the farm on my road map and put X's where the hickories were. They were gold trees to me. I would have hickory nuts in the fall. I could also make salt from hickory limbs. I cut off one and chopped it into bits and scraps. I stuck them in my sweater. And these are what hickory nuts look like. I don't know how to describe the taste of hickory nuts. I haven't had them very much, but they're really a strong nut, and the wood's really strong too. You can use it to smoke different meats and stuff. The land was up and down and up and down, and I wondered how great grandfather ever cut it and plowed it. There was one stream running through it, which I was glad to see, for it meant I did not have to go all the way down the mountain to the big creek for fish and water. Round noon, I came upon what I was sure was the old foundation of the house. Miss Turner was right. It was in ruins, a few stones in a square, a slight depression for the basement, and trees growing up through what had once been the living room. I wandered around to see what was left of the Gribbly house. And so this is what I'm picturing. I mean, his grandfather's house might be even more run down, but it's basically just a stone outline of where the house used to be, and there's trees growing up in the middle of the floor. And not even furniture is left, guys. Literally only the rocks are left, not the wood, not furniture, not anything, just the wood, or just the rocks, rather, right now, the foundation. After a few looks, I saw an apple tree. I rushed up to it, hoping to find an old apple. No apples beneath it. About 40 feet away, however, I found a dried one in the crotch of a tree. Stuck there by a squirrel and forgotten, I ate it. It was pretty bad, but nourishing. I hope there's another apple tree. There was another apple tree and 3 walnuts. I scribbled X's there These were wonderful finds. I poked around the foundation, hoping to uncover some old iron implements that I could use. I found nothing. Too many leaves had fallen and turned to loam. Too many plants had grown up and died down over the old site. I decided to come back when I had made myself a shovel. And so loam is when leaves break down, they get all crumply and they kind of turn to soil, and that is called loam. And so he was hoping to find like scraps of iron or something, but as of right now, he can't even find that. And iron actually will like break down and dissolve over time too. Whistling and looking for food and shelter, I went on up the mountain, following the stone walls, discovering many things about my property. I found a marsh. In it were cattails and arrowleaf. And cattails, if you've seen them, they kind of look like hot dogs on a stick. They grow around swamps, and you can actually eat them, although I don't think they'd be very good. And arrowleaf, good starchy foods. At high noon, I stepped onto a mountain meadow as enormous boulders rose up in the center of it. At the top of the meadow was a fringe of white birch, which were there were maples and oaks to the west and a hemlock forest to the right that pulled me right across the sweet grasses into it. Never, never have I seen such trees. These were giants, old, old giants. They must have begun when the world begun. I started walking around them. I couldn't hear myself step, so dense and damp were the needles. Great boulders covered with ferns and moss stood among them. They stood like pebbles beneath those trees. Standing before the biggest and the oldest and the most king-like of them, I suddenly had an idea. And remember, we looked at these trees last video. These are giant trees, 6 feet across, and we have some of those not in Kitsap County, but if you go on the Olympic Peninsula and you go into the Olympic Mountains, they have a lot of old hemlocks that is really good and really cool to see. They're really big. All right, page 28. This is about the old tree. I knew enough about the Catskill Mountains to know that when the summer came, they were covered with people. Although great-grandfather's farm was somewhat remote, still hikers and campers and hunters and fishermen were sure to wander across it. Therefore, I wanted a house that could not be seen. People would want to take me back where I belonged if they found me. I looked at that tree. Somehow I knew it was home, but I was not quite sure how it was home. The limbs were high and not right for a treehouse. I could build a back extension around it, but that would look silly. Slowly, I circled the great trunk. Halfway around, the whole plan became perfectly obvious. To the west, between two of the phalanges of the tree that spread out to be roots, was a cavity. The heart of the tree was rotting away. I scraped at it with my hands. Old, rotten, insect-ridden dust came tumbling out. I dug on and on, using my axe from time to time as my excitement grew. So guys, this is a hemlock tree. This is like the tree he found. A lot of times these trees fall down and they grow on old trees. These are called nurse trees, and you can even see one down here. And he's using phalanges, which are like circles that they use to connect pipes. So imagine like a hole here, like this one right here. And he starts digging in there, and these raw logs get rotten and they crumble apart and they're full of bugs. So almost exactly like this tree. His tree might have been a little bit bigger. He started digging in this and it just kind of crumbled away. With much of the old rot out, I could crawl in the tree and sit cross-legged. Inside, I felt as cozy as a turtle in its shell. I chopped and chopped until I was hungry and exhausted. I was now in the hard, good wood, and chopping it out was work. I was afraid December would come before I got a hole big enough to lie in. So I sat down to think. You know, those first days I just never planned right. I had the beginnings of a home, but not a bite to eat. And I had worked so hard that I could hardly move forward to find that bite. Furthermore, it was discouraging to feed the body of mine. It was never satisfied, and gathering food for it took time to and got it hungrier. Trying to get a place to rest, it took time and it got more tired. And I really felt like I was going in circles and wondered how primitive man ever had enough time and enough energy to stop hunting food and start thinking about fire and tools. So he's wasting a lot of time finding food, which is one of the big concerns. Is food's kind of hard to come by. So then you get so tired doing all this stuff that you don't even want to move to find food. I left the trees and went across the meadow looking for food. I plunged into the woods beyond, and there I discovered the gorge and the white cascade splashing down the black rocks into the pool below. They found kind of like a waterfall. A cascade's a waterfall. It was hot. I was hot and dirty. I scrambled down the rocks and slipped into the pool. It was so cold I yelled, but when I came out on the bank and put on my 2 pairs of trousers and 3 sweaters, which I thought was a better way to carry clothes than in a pack, tingled and burned and felt coltish. And a colt is a young horse, and they're really like excited. So when you jump in cold water and you get out and you're like, brr, then you feel like extra hyper, and that's how he's saying he's feeling. I leapt up the bank, slipped, and my face went down in a patch of dog-tooth violets. You would know them anywhere after a few looks at them at the botanical gardens and in colored flowered books. They are little yellow lilies on long, slender stems with oval leaves dappled with gray. But that's not all. They have wonderful, tasty bulbs. I was filling my pocket before I got up from my fall. And these are those dogtooth violets. I don't know. He's saying the ones he saw were yellow, but this is the picture that I had found. I'll have a salad type lunch, I said, as I moved up the steep sides of the ravine. I discovered that as late as it was in the season, the spring beauties were still blooming in cool pockets of the woods. And these are those spring beauties. Okay, so these are the dogtooth violets. These are the spring beauties. Not all flowers are edible, but a lot of flowers are, in fact, edible. So never just eat random flowers, but know that many of them are, in fact, good to eat, which is why you see deer eat a lot of flowers. They'll come and eat all your rose bushes or other types of flowers, and bees come and pollinate them, and birds and whatnot. So, generally speaking, most flowers are okay to eat. Okay, they are all right raw. That is, if you're hungry as I was. They taste a little like lima beans. I ate these as I went on hunting food, feeling better and better until I worked my way back to the meadow where the dandelions were blooming. Funny, I hadn't noticed them earlier. Their greens are good, and so are their roots, a little strong and milky, but you get used to that. So dandelions are interesting plants, and dandelions are those yellow flowers. You see them all over. Dandelions are the only flower where you can eat every single part, and every single type of dandelion is edible. So there's big dandelions, little dandelions. Those are different species, but every single species of dandelion, every single part on the flower you can eat. And I have eaten them. They taste bitter. They're not very good. But I mean, I guess if you're starving, that might be something that you would want to eat. A crow flew into the aspen grove without saying a word. The little I knew of crows from following them in Central Park, they always have something to say. But this bird was sneaking, obviously trying to be quiet. Birds are good food. Crows certainly not the best, but I did not know that then, and I launched out to see where it was going. I had a vague plan to try to noose it. This is the kind of thing I wasted time on in those days when time was so important. However, this venture turned out all right because I did not have to noose that bird. I stepped into the woods, looked around, could not see the crow, but noticed a big thick nest in the scrabbly pine. I started to climb the tree. Off flew the crow. What made me keep on climbing and face such discouragement, I don't know. But I did. And that noon, I had crow eggs with wild salad for lunch. I don't know if crow eggs sound very good to eat. At lunch, I also saw the problem of carving out my tree. After a struggle, I made a fire. Then I sewed a big skunk cabbage leaf into a cup with grass strands. I had read that you can boil water in a leaf. I never knew you could boil water in a leaf. And ever since then, I have been very anxious to see if this were true. Seems impossible, but it works. I boiled the eggs in a leaf. The water keeps the leaf wet, and although the top dries up and burns down to the water level, that's as far as the burning goes. As to pleased to see it all work. So today's Easter. I bet many of you guys had hard-boiled eggs too, and he made hard-boiled crow's eggs. And this is skunk cabbage, and it actually grows around here too, kind of in swampy areas. It has this yellow flower in this part right here, and it has really big leaves. They call it skunk cabbage because it kind of smells really bad. So he sewed those leaves up into a bowl, and then he boiled water in it, which is really amazing. I don't know if that actually works or not, but maybe next time I'm camping, or maybe I'll try that out if I find some skunk cabbage. Then here's what happened. Naturally, all this took a lot of time, and I hadn't gotten very far on my tree. So I was fretting and stamping out the fire when I stopped with my foot in the air. The fire! Indians made dugout canoes with fire. They burned them out an easier and much faster way of getting results. I would try fire in the tree. If I were very careful, perhaps it would work. I ran into the hemlock forest with a burning stick and got a fire going inside the tree. So this is what Sam's talking about. So Indians around here too. So they get a giant log, and then they put a bunch of fire in here, and then when the fire burned down, then they'd use the tool to chip it out, and it was a lot easier than just sitting there trying to chip it out when it wasn't burnt. So that's called the dugout canoe. He's going to try that technique inside the tree. So he scooped out all that dead wood. He's going to try to burn some of that good wood in there. Thinking that I ought to have a bucket of water in case things got out of hand, I looked desperately around me. The water was far across the meadow and down the ravine. This would never do. I began to think the whole inspiration of a home in the tree was no good. I really did have to live near water for cooking and drinking and comfort. I looked sadly at the magnificent hemlock and was about to put the fire out and desert it when I said something to myself. It must have come out of some book. Hemlocks usually grow around mountain streams and springs. I swirled on my heels, nothing but boulders around me. But the air was damp. Somewhere, I said, and darted around the rocks, peering and looking and sniffing and going down into pockets and dales. No water. I was coming back, circling wide, when I almost fell in it. Two sentinel boulders, dripping wet, decorated with flowers, ferns, moss, weeds, everything that loved water, guarded a bathtub-sized spring. You pretty thing, I said, flopped on my stomach and pushed my face into it to drink. I opened my eyes. The water was like glass, and in it were little insects with oars. They rowed away from me. Beetles skidded like bullets on the surface or carried a silver bubble of air with them to the bottom. Ha! Then I saw a crawfish. I jumped up, overturned rocks, and found many crawfish. At first, I hesitated to grab them because they can pinch. I gritted my teeth, thought about how much more it hurts to be hungry, and came down upon them. I did get pinched, but I had my dinner. That was the first time I had planned ahead. Any planning that I did in those early days was such a surprise to me and so successful that I was delighted with even a small plan. I wrapped the crawfish in leaves, stuffed them in my pockets, and went back to the burning tree. And crawfish are kind of like mini lobsters, but they live in fresh water. I did not put a slide on here, but if you are curious what a crawfish is, just think of a mini little lobster. It kind of fits in the palm of your hand. Bucket of water, I thought. Bucket of water. Where was I going to get a bucket? How did I think? Even if I found water, I'd get it back to the tree. That's how acidified I was in those days. I had never lived without a bucket before. Scrub buckets, water buckets. And so when a water problem came up, I just thought I could run to the kitchen and get a bucket. Well, dirt is as good as water, I said. I ran back to my tree. I can smother the fire with dirt. Days passed working, burning, cutting, gathering food, and each day I cut another notch on an aspen pole that had stuck in the ground for a calendar. And we're going to stop there. Remember the aspen poles, those white logs from the last video? This video is probably long too. I'm not sure how long it is, probably at least 30 or 40 minutes. Make sure you guys can split this into 2 parts. Watch the video. Please make sure you take the quiz. We had some students last week didn't get the quiz. I put it in the description in the YouTube video. I will also put it in the Google Classroom. As long as you use your Google account, I'll know it's you that took the quiz, okay? So split it into 2 parts if you want. I'll see you guys tomorrow afternoon, and stay safe, and I hope you're enjoying the book.